Dreaded MCAS for the 3rd graders coming up and 4th graders. Then some PTO meetings at the Thatchers.
In Foxborough last week. But basically, we are preparing risk. So there's a process to begin. So that's get us ready to prepare the site, which will be the first part of the job, which will start in earnest next spring. Would you like to add anything to that, Mr. Fadano?
Just that in doing the screening for CM candidates, 5 qualified. We were hoping for 6, 5 qualified. Suffolk, I believe it was the one that decided not to participate. So we got 5 out of the 6. They're supposed to have their proposals to us on Wednesday of this week, and they will be put together for the board members and passed out to the school building committee personnel for evaluation.
Thank you.
Pass it on.
Okay. So I have 2 brief items before we make a presentation on the budget. The first is that this Wednesday, the Coelho PTO is hosting a open house / unveiling of the new makerspace at Coelho. I believe their meeting starts at 6, but the ceremony I think is closer to 6:30. I would encourage you all to come over and see it. It is really impressive, and I think it gives you a window into where we're headed as a district, and also is a great example of how our efforts to engage the community help to meet our needs and to further the agenda of the district. The only other thing I was going to say today is, as we come back from vacation, the next 6 weeks are a critical period for the district. We try to convince ourselves like a school year is sort of like a factory line where each day is, another step down the line, and, we could insert, 1 day's worth of learning every single day along the way. But that's not how students experience school. That's certainly not how it feels to work in one or to deliver instruction in one. This 6-week period, as you got a good briefing on, includes a lot of testing. This is a heavy testing period for the entire district. Grades 3 through 8 we'll be doing MCAS. The high school has MCAS testing, and we also have AP exams in May as well. So there's a tremendous amount of testing going on, which certainly raises anxieties and puts a lot of pressure on both students and educators alike. And that, it would be hard to miss that feeling of tension in the district at this time period. But there are other important things that are going on. This is often a time of year where we have lots of awards and recognition ceremonies. As we bring a close to the year, we want to make sure to recognize students, so that's a nice part of this time. And logistically, it's an important period because we start to plan for the closeout of this school year, and we also begin the planning for next year. So we have to do those things sort of simultaneously while we're in this busy, busy period. And then finally, I just want to say that, back to my point about learning, it doesn't happen neatly and evenly over periods of time, and that one of the most crucial times, I think, when you try to learn anything is that period at the end where you attempt to consolidate what you've learned so that you'll have it at the ready for application someday down the line, right? Many of us have had the experience of learning something only to find that sometime in the future you realize you've forgotten it. In fact, I think many of us would remark that much of our high school experience gets filed in that category. So what we're learning as we become more and more attuned to what neuroscience is teaching us, that to really ensure that learning lasts, we have to take steps to make sure that we consolidate that learning, to place that learning in a larger context, and to do active things that help us to really, lock that learning into our minds for the long term. And so this is the point of the year where we've been working all year on things where if we don't do the various things that classroom teachers are doing at this stage to sort of shore up, what they've been working on all year, that's where you really see the loss of that opportunity moving forward. So this is a very critical part of the year for the district. And I think if you're in schools, you'll see that the importance of this time is really felt by everybody involved. So just a view of what we do. So our real work here tonight is to talk about the budget. So in terms of process, we'll review this at the end too, but tonight we had the hearing, and now I'm making a recommendation for your consideration. The plan is for you to consider this recommendation and then to take it up again at your next meeting to vote at it at that time. And if we make that timeline, then we'll be presenting our requested budget to City Hall in time for the mayor to submit his budget to the City Council.
Superintendent Sawyer, just if I can, as far as how this presentation will go, first I want to thank the administration for getting us the proposed budget and the materials significantly in advance so that we had a chance to review them. I know several people reached out with questions, and I know my questions were answered quickly, so thank you for that as well. If this is a discussion on the proposed budget, so if there are questions, please raise your hand and we'll get questions answered, and then at the end there'll be time for a back and forth on the presentation, the proposed budgets, and any questions or concerns that we have as individual committee members. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you. All right. So before we can talk about FY19, I think it's important to understand the context we're operating from, which is FY18. And FY18 proposed some serious challenges to us as a district. Once again, we were funded below level service. So last year, this time, we proposed a level service budget, and we received funding less than that number, which means that right off the bat, we were starting from a deficit. And to be clear, city funding exceeded the 2.5% target that we're always trying to work towards. It was the state last year that funded us at well below 1%, which is what caused this problem. The good news is that in spite of the challenge, we made real progress, right? Reached agreements with our unions that helped to create a more sustainable environment. We are continuing that work as we try to reach a new wage scale for new hires with the AEA that would even take us further in that direction. We signed favorable deals with vendors and utilities, and we also reached other agreements with other parties that really helped to address what otherwise was a difficult situation. And so while we were funded below level services last year, we still found ways within the budget to reduce the $10 million gap that we're always talking about. Almost, about $830,000 of that money was secured through various actions. Now, one of the ways that we did that was through prepaid tuitions. Another was through the cost savings that I mentioned in the slide before. And then also, we used carryover funds from the previous year to help us to make progress in light, even though we were moving against that gap between where we need to be and where we currently are.
Superintendent Sawyer?
Yes.
Just going back to that previous slide, in the simple math, just want to make sure the simple math is correct here. If you took the 830 off the 10.16, it would mean that we have a shortfall now of about 9.3 million. Is that accurate?
Yes, although that number is a moving target in the end as well. In fact, we should probably have a conversation about how often we should recalculate it, because one, the costs of things as they were estimated at a moment in time change, and two, our perception of what the needs are evolves over time. You know, I would hope that the community will not hold us accountable for our best guess of what exactly we need, 2 years ago, in 5 years' time, right? Like at some point, things change enough that changes. So while I would like to point out that 10.16 was a estimate in a moment in time, and until we recalculate it, that's the best we have, but yes, based on that number, we're closer to.
So using the best numbers
Yes.
we had a year ago, we're at about 9.3 still.
Correct.
Mrs. Skills?
Mr. Furtado, do we expect any carryover funds this year to roll into next year?
Not at this time. It's still a little too early to tell, but if there is a surplus, a meaningful surplus at the end of the year, it'll be small.
I mean, to be clear, there will be a surplus because we can't have a deficit. And while Mr. Furtado is very talented, I don't see us landing at, 0.00. So, given that, we can't come in the red, we will come in the black, which is a surplus, but
Not,
he is correct. It will not be sizable. Not to the degree that last year's
Right.
was, so we do not have this opportunity next year, which I think is the key point here.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so I think it's important to note that the city's commitment to its schools remains strong. We are expecting a $1 million increase in the contribution from the city for FY19, which would be a 3% increase. Again, that's in excess of the 2.5% target, and is in line with what we've been getting roughly. It's actually a increase of about $250,000 over what the increase was last year. So, Chairman Lewis.
That number, assuming level service funding?
That's what we expect based on the city's commitments.
Okay.
Right, so when we talk about the things we talked about a million times, the $1 million from the meals tax, the 50% from the tax levy, there's a sum of money that we got in one particular year that we are held harmless for. So when you add up the various commitments, you get to that number. Fully expect the city to honor those commitments. Now, it's very important to understand that these are commitments above need for level services. So when you put those two things together, we need, 4.9? So we need 4.9. The city is going to provide us with 3, which again is in excess of 2.5%. So you put the states at 5.3, and that's helping to cover the difference in what our need is. So, this was a significant increase over what we've been getting the last few years, and that's making a significant difference in this particular budget. So, so the level service estimate that we are providing today is 4.9% over the FY18 budget. Now, that's a slight difference from what we said in December. In December, the number was 4.8%. The difference between those two numbers is simply that, 4 months later, we have a more accurate estimate, and it's that 4.9% figure. And the point that we made in December, that I'll make again today in case anyone forgot, is that while that 4.9% is well in excess of the 2.5% that we're supposed to be targeting to achieve a sustainable budget, it's really not what it seems to be, because it's really only a 2.9% increase over FY18 if you look at how much we spent this year. And that goes back to where I started earlier in the presentation. We had with prepaid tuitions, with carryover funds, right? There were these things we did to cover the gap between what we needed for level services and what we were funded at. That meant that we spent more than we were budgeted, which means that, that leaves us with a greater increase if you base this year's budget off of last year's budget, not what we actually spent. And that's what that delta is between the 2.9 and the 4.9, right? So we are achieving a sustainable level of growth in the budget increase, because it's that under that 3% mark, which is really where the ceiling that we're trying to achieve, stay under. And when you look at what we actually spent, that's what we're doing. And you say, well, why did you spend more? The reason we spend more is because we weren't funded at what we needed, and to face the consequences of living in that budget would have been back to austerity, which I don't think anybody really wanted. So, some highlights. This budget does accommodate our health insurance increases, which are always a concern. So that's in there. Those prepaid and carryover costs that we talked about, those are now incorporated into this budget. So that's why it's that 4.9%. We're continue to pay for those things, which is why it's level services. And last year's budget, we didn't have the agreements in place, so we had to guess at what those numbers would be. This budget reflects accurate exposure on the contract. So, in total, we are recommending a level service budget, which is $75.199977 million. Right, that represents a level service budget. That is a 4.9% increase. And it is because it's a 4.9% increase that we believe it is most prudent to stick to the level service number this budget season, because we are trying to catch up with the hole we've dug for ourselves by having 2 years in a row in which we didn't have level services, right? So we need to make a correction, which is that 4.9%, to get us back to a place where we could deliver a 2.5% budget off of what's budgeted for the following year, right? So this is a sizable increase. It's in excess of what I think we could reasonably expect the city to come up with based on the years that we've had. Now, it is not in excess of what our students need. I can't be more clear that we still are operating in a situation in which we are over $9 million away from what our kids need every day for us to be able to deliver the education that they deserve and is required under the law. So we still have a long way to go, but that $75 million number is a significant increase and will stretch the city's capacity to meet it. Remember that their the tax levy for this year is roughly $1.6 million in change, right? Do I have that number right, Mr. Vitale?
That's what they reported.
Yes. So our increase, is really puts a very heavy burden on the city.
A large portion of that is being paid here. Isn't that the change in dynamic that we haven't had the past couple of years?
Yes, the state's paying a far greater share than it normally does. But the city's share is also being
Before you want it. Sure. The state's cherry sheets don't know what the voting status is, but that's what's on the cherry sheet.
The number both the school department and the city are working off of from the state is a number that's associated with House Ways and Means.
So to build off of that, the initial governor's budget was 70. Hang on, I got the spreadsheet here. It was 72, 430, 197 for our net school spending, and that was before House Ways and Means. And then with the extra 250 and change, that jumped us up to 72, 697. So it's a $800,000 difference between what I'm seeing there and what I'm seeing in terms of this state spreadsheet. Can you explain?
Yeah, the city gets credit for providing administrative support to the district against net school spending, and it's a little bit of a I'm not going to say a shell game, but it's offsetting transportation costs. So that deduct that you see on that number reflects that credit that the city exercised for administrative support.
And that has gone up in part because our number of is a per pupil.
It's a pure per
pupil
pupil cost, but it increased 6% this year for 19. It went up 6%, which is pretty healthy. We could all live on 6%, I think. So.
And isn't the charter school reimbursement reflected in that delta as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so do you know offhand what the total contribution that we're getting from the city is this year in millions?
35-ish.
Okay.
I have it in my office from it, yes.
So, I think one of the interesting things, at least to me, is that, and I've noticed this in previous budgets, so this is not anything new, is that when the percent over net school spending is taken into account, I noticed that the credits are also factored in to that, which I think is perhaps a little misleading in terms of what that figure is, because if you look at the state sheet, the required contribution is $3,948,759 from the city.
30-something million, not 3.
34.
Okay.
It's almost 35.
Yeah.
So I just think that's. I guess I was just having trouble wrapping my head around that there was a 4% spending over net school.
I guess my question to Mr. Furtado would be, when the state finally calculates whether or not we met net school spending, do they use the original number that Mr. Quinn is referring to, or do they use the adjusted number in the end?
To mark whether they use the adjusted number, not the posted.
But when they count percentage over net school spending, they do not factor in credits as percentage over. Because I've seen quoted spending over net school take into account. So they've lowered what their required contribution is based on the credits, right?
Yes.
So instead of, and I think that's reflected there.
Yes.
And then when the money comes in, it's almost, I don't want to say they're double counting, but they're giving themselves the benefit of reducing what they have to actually provide, and then saying that they spent over that. What we're actually
I see
receiving.
what you're saying. Yeah, so probably I can find out. I don't know off the top of my head if the foundation number is used or if it's the net of the credit that's used.
But which number are we using when we say that this budget is 4% over?
That requirement, the adjusted requirement.
Which I would argue that
It's less
based
than
on
4.
what the state sheet is saying is that is not our net school spending number. It's about almost 800,000
Yeah.
less than what our net school spending number is. If we're using House Ways and Means.
Yeah.
Mr. Storrs?
I remember having this conversation with you in the past, but I want to just verify. So the money that is provided back for those services, what do we get for those services?
Sure.
Yeah,
We
what are
get
those services?
they process our payrolls. They issue the checks. So we get the treasurer's office support. We get support from the auditor, the city auditor, who does checks on journal entries and ledgers and invoices. We get they take credit for the police presence in the school, so the DARE officers and the resource officers, as well as the crossing guards.
For the SRO, is the salary in our budget or was it outside?
It's not in our budget, but they get credit for that expenditure.
Okay, and that's part of that 800,000 or whatever it is now.
Yeah.
It's higher than 800.
Yeah, it's higher.
Right. So we're talking what, almost 900,000 at this point?
Like I said, I have the sheet.
Okay,
in my
it's
office.
got to be close to that because it was 800 in the past. Because I remember always hearing we got 1.2, but really it's 400 because of the 800 that at that time was the credits. So effectively, 800, almost $900,000 is being provided back for bookkeeping and support of that nature. Okay, is that by law or is that just something that was done in the city?
Any city or town has the right to identify those costs and get credit for them.
But not every city or town does that.
No, I don't believe that it's across the state of Massachusetts.
I don't think it's universal, but in conversations that I've had with MASC field reps, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon.
Yeah, it's very common.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mrs. Scales?
So the budget that you're presenting to us, back in December, you had a presentation to us that included 3 priorities.
Yes.
Further progress in reaching appropriate staffing levels, which includes middle school core subjects, high school all subjects, 5 to 8 specials. Increased supports for social emotional needs, personnel programming, professional development and resources, and increased access to instructional technology, a whole slew of stuff.
Yep.
How does this address any of those needs?
The short answer is that it does not. Budgetarily speaking, we're asking for level services, so level services implies that we stand pat and have next year what we currently have this year. But I would say that just as we did last year, we found opportunities to make progress even though we were funded below level services. If we were actually able to reach a level service budget this year, we are hopeful that there will be future opportunities that present themselves in various ways. It's currently April. Between now and September, it is not uncommon for veteran teachers to leave the district for various reasons or to retire unexpectedly. These kinds of changes present us with the opportunity to incur some savings that we can then use in various ways. If through the course of the year, things that are based on estimates go certain ways, like snow. Last year we had a good snow year. This year we had a bad snow year. So there are all kinds of fluid situations that give us the opportunity to act on those priorities. And it's important to identify them and know what they are so that when the opportunities present themselves, we're able to act on it in a way in keeping with those things, as I believe we did in FY18.
Would that leave us in the same situation next year? Where we're not looking for more than level services because we found ways to pay for what we need rather than ask for
It depends
what
on
we
the
need?
source of what we're talking about. So in the case of salary, if you're replacing a veteran, 2 veteran teachers with 3 new teachers, no, it doesn't have that impact on the budget because your salaries are your salaries. But yes, if we had carryover funds from this year and chose to use them on salaries, we would be putting ourselves back in that situation. So it depends. But the whole point is that if we have a level service budget, we don't need to sort of, take from another year to get us to level, which is what we've been doing for the last 2 years.
Is striving for level enough, I guess, is what I'm struggling with. I know it's something we struggle with every year when we have these conversations. The last 2 years when we haven't gotten level services, and have knew in advance that we weren't going to get level services. The question is, why are we asking for level services when we know we need more? So I think that's, if I'm reading into Mrs. Scales' questions, it's also partly what she was getting at as well.
It's true. That's the one thing that I had trouble with saying yes to last year.
Yep.
And I'll have trouble again saying yes this year.
And I have trouble
I know
asking
you
for
do.
level
I know you
services
do.
when I know we need another $9 million.
Yes.
I share the concern, but, you know, as a city employee, I feel a certain responsibility to put the school's needs in the context of the larger city. And, you know, especially considering we're requesting a 4.9% increase, while yes, luckily the state's the one that's able to swoop in and save us and provide most of that, the city is making a sizable contribution as well. And I think that when you look at what its revenues are, it's in keeping with, you know, what they're capable of doing, and that what we really need to work towards is, you know, some of those other things that we've discussed at various opportunities, especially, you know, when we worked on the sustainability report plan. You know, there are things that we can do as we move forward and that we're trying to do so that we can get ourselves to a place where we're looking at more than level service increases, which is the end goal. The point I would make is that in a year in which you need 4.9% to make level services, you know, that's not the best place, because the metaphor I like to use with people all the time is that we're sailing into the wind, right? You know, this budgetarily, you know, we have real challenges, and we're trying to avoid, you know, really catastrophe is what we're talking about, and which is what this district experienced not too long ago. And we're trying to avoid those situations until conditions improve. And I do believe there are reasons to believe the conditions will improve, because, you know, the state's economy has certainly improved. That we're talking about the increase that they're providing. If we get another increase like that next year, if we're able to avoid, you know, loading up too much during the year next year, that would be the opportunity that we're talking about to ask for more than level services. Likewise, you know, the community has approved a new high school. There are going to be all kinds of opportunities between here and there to help provide a different budgetary situation. So I agree. I think all on what the long-term goal is. The question is, you know, what's the appropriate course from here to there? And yeah, I mean, our kids have real needs, and that's something that the educators in this district face every day. You know, quite admirably, considering what they're up against, because we are short-staffed to meet those kids' needs, and it's the kids who suffer. And we try every day to make sure that you know, we accommodate that reality as best we can. And by the way, as I always say, I think if we look at the results that we get for, you know, what we invest as a community into our schools, you know, we're doing a pretty good job. But I sometimes think we're a victim of our own success, and that people say, well, you know, if we're able to get it done, then what's the problem? But it's unsustainable. And that's, you know, I know that at least I believe in the subcommittee, you've talked about the fact that this year's budget, you know, one of the reasons why we're not going to have a sizable surplus to carry over is because, you know, our tuitions for special education have upticked significantly. Well, you know, I don't think it's hard to make the case that that is directly related to the fact that we have class sizes that are too high, and we have teachers who don't have the supports that they need, and as a result, you know, the kids are suffering, and that some of those situations sort of spiral into a situation in which we can't meet the students' need anymore because we couldn't intervene in time with the proper supports to get them back on track when it was still something we could handle. And so there, as we said at the time when we did all of the cuts that we did, you know, there's going to be a long-term price to this, and we're beginning to pay it. So I share the concern.
Mr. Quinn?
So going back to your point, Superintendent Sawyer, I think one of the things that kind of makes me feel like we're whistling past the graveyard here a little bit is that this Chapter 70 increase is abnormal compared to what we've seen in most recent years. And what I can't figure out is what variables, and I sent an email into the Chapter 70 office, I haven't heard back yet, what variables changed to precipitate this increase, because our foundation enrollment, I think, only went up 30 kids. So I don't, do you have any sort of indication about what's changed in the formula? I mean, what's changed in our demographics?
Right.
Or what's going on with Attleboro that's sparked this? Because I don't think we can count on this again.
Right, no, again, there's sort of an 18-month lag in the foundation formula, so this is something that occurred, back in 16, that has impacted our budget now, and I think that, the only thing I know is, free and reduced, percentages still go up. So, as a community, that would suggest that, the economically disadvantaged profile of Attleboro has changed, and not in the way you'd want it to. That would certainly fuel some of the increase in the Chapter 70 formula for us.
Thank you.
Mrs. Torres?
The hard thing for me every year when we do this is the idea of, do we put forward a budget of what we truly need, or do we put forward a budget of what we believe we're going to get? And that's what we're really talking about here. We truly need to be able to do the things that we'd want to do, to not have class sizes in the high 20s and so on and so on. We would need 83, 84 million. We know we're not going to get 83, 84 million, so it's just that question of, do we put a value out there of what we need so that we can send that message? This is what we need, but we're making do with what we get, or do we put out a value of what we believe we're going to get?
So
And that's tough.
It is tough, but I should clarify, there's no reason to believe that we're going to get fully funded at level services. That number is in excess of what the city's commitment we could reasonably expect based on prior promises. So we're close, and we are working closely with the city to try to narrow the gap. And, until the mayor submits his budget, it's going to be an ongoing process right up to the end, as we try to get that number as close as possible. Because again, what I would really like to do is to get that level service number. But, it's not, that number doesn't represent what we know we're going to get.
Sure.
That's actually in excess of it.
What we believe we may be able to get is probably a safer way to say it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, that's why it's important for us to have this conversation, so that even though we may put forward a number that is reasonable, it's not getting lost the fact that, we're doing some exceptional things here in Attleboro with the limited resources that we have. And honestly, we do need more to be able to do the things that we want to do. And that's the important point I brought it up for.
Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging that we might have an opportunity to catch up on some of the things that we've lost over the couple of years, not to go back to what we really lost a while back. But I share Mr. Quinn's concern about sustainability. I mean, this is really big out of the state compared to where they've been the last few years. And, if they do this year and then they go back to their past practices next year, we're going to be kind of back in that same situation. The city's continued its commitment, and we have to be, cognizant of that. But I think, once we get through the whole budget process, I think, and we maybe need to do it on an annual basis, is revisit that number, because I think that's part of the message that this is where we really should be. This is where we are. And I think people really liked seeing the breakdown of that number instead of just putting a number out there, so that they can actually start to equate, what would a reduction in class size down to where we think it should be? What is that number? What is guidance counselors in the middle school? What is, the list goes on and on. And just so people can really put, you put too big of a number, it goes right over people's heads. There's nothing to equate to. But if you said, okay, it's going to be $2 million to put guidance counselors in the middle schools, or whatever the number is, you can break it down into some smaller pieces. People have an opportunity to really absorb it better, I think.
Mrs. Torres?
I think it's also important to always talk about, because it's such a big number when you put it up there, how much of that number is fixed costs. We're talking salaries and benefits and utilities and so on and so on. Of that number, percentage-wise, how much is not fixed?
We're down to below 2, so it's...
I always find it important to put that out there. Of that 75 million, only 2% of it is what we have to really work with. The rest is.
Discretionary to the
right.
district, right? The rest of it is fixed and contractually obligated.
Thank you.
Mr. Quinn?
I want to follow up on something Mr. Larson said about outlining what the cost to do some of the things that we've outlined. I think it's worth considering with the school committee to perhaps vote the dream budget with the exact cost of what these items would be, and then, symbolically also cut them, and so that we get down to that number, so that we don't lose sight of what our needs are and what the costs are, and also communicating to people if for some reason we're able to, the growth continues in some of the, commercial areas, if we're coming into revenue, that when we add these positions, we talk about, listen, these are positions that we wanted to have in here in the first place. We told you how much they were going to cost, and, now we're able to reinstate them. Even if it's symbolic, and we say to the city that we know that, realistically, you can't afford to provide this based on the existing levy, but here's what we'd like to do if we had this money, and then we can, cut those items from the budget, then start to work with unrealistic numbers.
Just don't call it a dream budget. It's a need budget.
It's a need budget. Fair enough.
I think that's a good idea, and it's something I can touch base with the administration on. Any other questions or comments on the proposal? All right, again, I want to thank you guys for all the work. Oh, Mr. Guttis? Yeah.
I have some more detailed questions. I know Mr. Sawyer had one more slide left. I was gonna let him get through that before
Okay.
getting into some of those, but.
Just to conclude, I was going to go back to the timeline. Tonight represents my recommendation. We'll be back with another iteration of this budget based on your feedback for the 7th. And then later in that week, we anticipate the mayor presenting his budget, which would be informed by your request.
So what I would suggest for the next meeting is come back with a level service budget, and also come back with the needs-based budget, that we can go over both and have a discussion, and as a committee vote on what we want to submit.
Okay.
Questions, Mr. Geis?
Yeah, so, just looking at the actual numbers going building by building, the different departments and everything, to the point that Ms. Scales made initially, and something that you guys touched on a few times in terms of finding opportunities for funding. I think it's important to note between the elementary level and the middle school level, with the energy agreements that were discussed, we had about $123,000 in savings. Those seemed to go primarily towards professional staff salaries, adjustments to the ELL programs at elementary, and special education at elementary. There seemed to be an uptick in special education at the middle schools, which, Mr. Sawyer, you already touched on, but I noticed there was also some cuts to guidance across the middle schools. Is that just trying to find money to address the other needs, like in special education and things like that?
We had budgeted the adjustment counselors in 18 at the beginning of the budget process, but in the course of the year, we had some significant special needs issues, particularly at Brennan. So we gave that up to fund teaching staff to support the programs there.
Okay. And then I also noticed, although there were energy savings at the middle school and elementary levels, there was a significant electrical increase at the high school. What was the?
Again, yeah, it wasn't an increase. We've, if you look at the budget line, we had budgeted for the solar farm to be online at the beginning of the year, and it didn't happen. We lost half a year of credits that were all earmarked for the high school. So that if you look at the 18 budget and the 18 actual, that delta is the solar farm. Now the solar farm is up and running as of December 15th. However, it's not running fully. So the Finance Committee was given a report on its performance to date, and that's what the 19 number reflects.
Okay. There was also in central admin, there were some, it looked like some clerk cuts, but an increase in HR contracted services. I know Ms. Singer was trying to get into electrical time.
Oh, that was two things. When we hired Julianne, we hired her mid-year.
Okay.
So we just put her in a line, actually, in the PD section, because that's where the funding was, because she took Joan DeAngelis' place.
Okay.
Budgetarily speaking.
Okay, so it's just correcting.
So it's just correcting that.
Okay.
So taking her staff and the contracted services are the software for time and absence management and recruiting that, again, had historically been located in professional development, just because that's where our budget line resided. We put all of that in HR. Now we have an actual HR budget.
Okay. And then there were some, over the last couple of years, there have been some big peaks and valleys in the curriculum supply lines, and we're heading into a big peak.
Big peak.
What does that include?
Those are the consumables and new programs for curriculum, replacing old programs that we're not going to be funding anymore. For the last 3 years since I came back, we have funded that out of carryover. So that's why that number popped. That was something that was established by Ken Shan, where he told the schools that those consumables and curriculum supplies would be purchased centrally. And so that it's always been a big number. It's just been paid for from prior year unexpended funds.
Okay. I think those were all my big points. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Geddes. All right, again, I want to thank the administration for putting this together and getting it to us in a time where we could really spend some time with them to review it. Thank you for answering the questions today. Again, I know there's still tweaking to do to the level service budget for 2 weeks, so if you can do that, and as Mr. Quinn suggested, I think it was a good one of coming with what that needs-based budget looks like, so we can fulfill our responsibility to the community and the school department, just acknowledge the needs of where we need to get to, and then how that differs from what level services looks like when we make our decision.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else in your report?
That concludes my report.
All right, moving on, we have minutes from, was actually the April 9th, 2018 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your materials. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda items. Motion to approve a donation in the amount of $657.54 from the class of 2016 to the Attleboro High School Gifts and Donation Line.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve a donation in the amount of $500 from the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation to the AHS Robotics Club.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve a donation of a MakerBot Replicator 5th generation 3D printer valued at $1,350 from Michael Van Hamel to be used to promote project-based learning in the Hill Roberts Library.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve a day field trip proposal for 74 students to attend Music in the Parks audio cased performance venue for performing musicians at Six Flags in Anawan, Mass. on May 4th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve a day field trip proposal for 42 Coelho students to attend, compete in a band competition against other Massachusetts schools at Six Flags in Anawan, Mass. on May 25th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That concludes the consent agenda. Subcommittee reports. We'll start with policy and personnel. Mrs. Scales?
Thank you. Just let you know that the following items are going to be removed from the table and will go into immediate effect. Policy EFD meal charge policy, GBEBD online fundraising and solicitations, GDI staff probation, and exhibit JQE1 user fee schedule.
Short one tonight.
That's it.
Teaching and learning, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple items on our docket. First, we reviewed some ELL data that showed a shift or a needed shift in terms of moving our students, which were currently in a newcomer program where they were all together, are not native speakers. And what we're finding is they were socially clustering together and not being dispersed in terms amongst their peers. Pleased to report that the administration has put forward a new approach to distribute those students amongst their peers in all of the classrooms with the teacher now floating around, and the English development for those students has just been off the charts. And it's wonderful to see, and they're, fully integrating into our community, and it's just a wonderful program. Next, there's a new initiative to bring illustrative math, a new math approach which focuses more on problem solving and real-world math applications. Assistant Superintendent Regan has been really aggressive in terms of being an ardent advocate for something that's come up from teachers. This is teacher-driven PD that they found, but also negotiating a really aggressive price on the project and bringing other districts into the discussion to cut down the overall cost for our district. I know, as Mr. Furtado said, we've got limited discretionary funds, and I just want to commend the Assistant Superintendent for putting together a proposal that's financially responsible, but also providing the teachers with what they need. We talked about at length the new accountability system, which I'm sure we'll get a much larger update about what that's going to look like with MCAS 2.0. I think the biggest takeaway is that they've tried to condense the indicators a little bit in terms of where the schools fall, but also, and this is somewhat problematic, that the lowest 25% of scores is going to count for about 50% of the rating. So it's just something to keep an eye on when we have our labels. I think that Scott raised a really good point that he asked, but what about our CTE? And there's a lot of things that we value about engaging and challenging, inspiring, that don't come into these labels that the state gives us. And I think it's important that we continue to stress the narrative that we have. Come and see what we're doing at our showcases in addition to the traditional metrics. And we talked a little bit about a revised parent survey that's going to be coming out as part of our strategic plan. One of our responsibilities was to solicit from parents the types of elective programs. Again, this factors into our budget discussion, so that way when revenues become available, what kind of specials do we want to offer? What do parents value in terms of providing new opportunities for students? So parents be on the lookout in the next couple of months, maybe for the 2018-19 school year. Just getting your feedback about what electives, if money's available, that you'd like to see. And then finally, we closed out a little bit talking about calendars. First, professional development, how that's changed to a more pathway-based approach. There used to be a little bit more of a flexibility and choice, but so you choose different sessions. But now they found a little bit disjointed. Teachers are now in choice-based pathways to have a little bit more coherence. We also talked about the district calendar, and one of the reasons that it came up in part was prompted by a April 1st Sun Chronicle article, and I can only speak for myself when I was a little confused and disappointed by the framing of the school committee position in the piece about how schools were going to be utilized for polling places, or our position. I think if you watch the video from the 13th of March in 2017, when the Election Commission came to us, you'll see that the perception portrayed in that article did not match the discussion that we had. Personally, I'm a supporter of having elections in our school. However, I think there are significant logistical challenges, including parking, traffic, security, scheduling, professional development scheduling, that all would need to be resolved at least a year in advance before we had any sort of plan in place. This is not something that can be done overnight, but I think there was a willingness from the committee to have an open door for these conversations to continue. However, given the conversation, I think it's a prudent that we now take a more proactive step, because while the door's been open, I think, taking a leadership role. It was the subcommittee's recommendation that the administration put together a detailed description and recommendation for the conditions under which we would be able to hold elections within the school building. This would include our parking availability, our needs for traffic facilitation, security support, and other logistical considerations. So the election commission could decide, based on the criteria that we lay out, whether or not our schools would be viable. It was the consensus of the subcommittee that we'd like to see a proposal as an agenda item on a future school committee meeting, but no further action was taken. So that's just our recommendation, Mr. Chair, to do with it as you wish with the school committee.
So the recommendation is that we get a proposal from the administration, and then the school committee would have to vote on whether or not to approve the proposal and allow it for, allow the buildings for use for polling locations.
So what, I guess what we were envisioning is that the administration would develop a detailed proposal under all the conditions under which what we would need if the schools wanted to be used. We have a detailed. At that point, what I think we would recommend the school committee to do is to authorize the administration to send those conditions over to the election commission so they could decide whether or not they want to continue and further the conversation if they felt that they could meet our conditions that we spell out explicitly. And if they could meet our conditions, then, you know, we can come back to have that discussion. But I think it's important for us to be explicit about, you know, how many parking spots are available, what would we need for security in each of the buildings, which buildings would be available, what would those conditions be like, so they can make an informed decision on whether or not they'd like to move forward with us.
Sure. I think we just would need to, as a committee, vote on the proposal, because I
Agreed.
wouldn't want to send it to the election commission.
Agreed, yep.
And then have them come back and see that it's, you know, the majority doesn't.
Agreed.
So wouldn't that be maybe better for either back at your subcommittee or at the facility subcommittee rather than the full committee? Just to go through that information, and then if the subcommittee felt that it was reasonable, it could be brought up to the full.
Sure, I think
So that's an alternative.
yeah, that's an alternative. I think either way, it will come back to us.
Right.
But I think, you know, at the discretion of the chair, when that time frame would be in consultation with the consultation of the administration. This is not something that we can look at, as we talked about with the PD schedule and with the overall schedule. We're not looking at 2018 for this. We're at the best and everything falling right, and that all the administration's needs can be met. 2019 would be the absolute earliest that we would be able to put something together. At least that was the consensus coming out of our group. And that might even be quick based on what we need to do.
And I would clarify 2019 being fall 2019, spring 2020, so the 2019 local election is what we're talking about.
The 2019-2020 school year would be the first time that we would
Right.
be even able to consider it as a logistic.
I thought it was 2020. I thought the personal days were set for the next 2 school years.
Again,
that
that would be
consideration,
everything that would be breaking.
Yeah.
We would need at least a year. Again, everything breaking perfectly. Yes.
I think one of the other challenges they're going to have, being the election commission, using the school, is because of our commitment with our contractual partners and the desire, from what I heard Ms. Dispatcher saying about wanting to have a permanent home that they could use so they're not moving people around from place to place. You know, if we get into a situation like we've been in the last 12 months, where we have a number of elections come up in a very short period of time, if we are, you know, one of the new permanent homes, and all of a sudden we've got 3 months to shut a school down for a day so that we can have an election, reschedule PD, you know, so I mean, I think there's a lot of logistical issues with using the schools beyond my personal feeling about it, but that if the election commission is truly looking for a permanent home for a particular ward, I just don't see the schools really being a viable option, because of the fact that they're going to have situations come up in short periods of time that it's going to be very difficult for us to accommodate. And I think it'll be interesting to see what we can put together as an option to that, but I mean, I think I see that as being their biggest hurdle.
And I think, to your point, Mr. Larson, what we're trying to do is, or ask the administration to spell out specifically, because this is a reality, under what conditions
Could we do it?
Yep. And then it's up to the election commission to see if they can comply with whatever we approve in terms of those conditions. But I think spelling those out specifically is helpful for not only determining right now what the realities are, but when this conversation, when we're all off the committee 10, 15 years from now, or maybe some of you will still be here, and they're wondering, well, why do we have elections in school, or why do we not have elections in school? We have a specific document that can say, here's exactly why, these are the logistics, these are the conditions under which we can host an election, and that committee at that time decided yes or no. Yes, Mr. Geddes, and then Mr. Swiss.
And I think as part of the discussion in the subcommittee, we talked about the different special elections versus primaries and the November elections, and are there elections that the administration would be comfortable allowing to happen with students in the building versus without? Because obviously November elections are much more well attended. There's much higher rate of voter participation as opposed to the local state primary or the mayoral primary or something along those lines. And so it was essentially, let's see what the administration thinks would be all of the different scenarios for it to happen, so that they know that, like you're saying, if an election pops up that we need something within 30 days, they know what additional security would be needed because we can't close the school in time for that to happen, or something along those lines.
So, because I share many of Mr. Larson's concerns with this concept, are you envisioning that effectively the administration is just going to come back with a laundry list of these are what we feel we would need? For example, if they came back and said, we need a year's notice for any election, which would be a very reasonable need, because we'd have to negotiate, and we'd have to do this, and we'd have to do that. So even though it's quite possible that we know that because the election commission wants one home for the election, not this election can be there and that election is somewhere in a different building, we know they're not willing to do that. They want one place so that they don't have to keep sending out word to the residents. If they come back and they say, yeah, we need that, and we know ultimately that there's no way that they could do that because special elections, you're not going to get a year's notice, we're still going to provide that list that this is what we would need to be able to do it, even though we understand that the odds of them being able to ever meet that is
absolutely.
No.
So the plan would, at least the way we envision it, the administration would come up with a comprehensive scenarios under which, if we were to do closed school, open school, this is what we need, or if we were going to go closed school, and then it would be up to the committee to decide, based on the administration's recommendations, how we would want to approach it. We would amend as we see fit, and then we would put the ball would then be back in the elections commission's court to say, all right, so under these are the conditions. This, based on this rationale, for educational purposes, do you want to continue this conversation? And at that point, they would have a much clearer understanding of. Mrs. Sawyer.
Well, this all boils down to the situation that's happening in Ward 1, and I'm not sure if it was this administration that said it was a wonderful civics lesson when the election was in Coelho, or if it was the principal. But I know I asked several people, including the APD, if there was any problems that happened that day, and they said no, there was no issues in Coelho. I heard more complaints about it going to St. Teresa's than it was at Coelho, and I think that we should look more ahead than waiting to 2020, because I've received numerous emails saying that people are irate that we're contemplating sending them out of Ward 1 to vote, and I think that's an issue.
Mr. Chair, then Mr. Short.
Yeah, I think we need the proposal from the administration, and then we need to see if it's something as a committee that the majority of us can agree with, and then send it to the election commission. I think that's the clear path we have to take here. I think it should be, we'll have to tell the election commission if the makeup of the committee changes before they act on it. You know, the results could change, but, you know, we need to let them know it's something that we're comfortable with as a group or not. But, you know, we need to see what the administration's recommendations are on if they can do what they would require to do elections in school. Because I know, you know, based on the comments, that there's a difference of opinions of members here. I expect that to be the case. There are a lot of concerns there. There are logistics, there are safety concerns, there are, you know, civics lessons. There are you know, people coming from different angles on this. So until we see what the proposal is, we're kind of talking in abstract here.
So, yeah, I just want to say, I mean, ultimately, it's not us, the school committee, saying, you know, you can't vote in Ward 1 because there's no facilities. We have to look at it from the point of view of what's in the best interest of our students, what's safe for our students, and so on. So we got to make our decision based on that. In the past, we have. The one election that, or I believe it was one, maybe two, but the one election that we had in Coelho, that was not a presidential election. That and there was traffic-related concerns. There was a lot of other logistical issues associated with that. If you turn that into a presidential election, you compound that by 3. There's a big difference between the election that we did hold there and the type of elections that we are discussing right now. And that's the kind of stuff that, I mean, it sounds like what you want is the administration to look at. So I totally support moving forward in that way.
Yeah. Any other comments before I close it? So again, we look forward to the administration's proposal, and thank you very much for the discussion and interest. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. That concludes our subcommittee reports and our business agenda for tonight. Last on the agenda is open forum. This is a time when members of the public may address the school committee. Open forum is not a time for committee members to engage in a dialogue with members of the public. Guidelines for open forum are available to you. Please know that we are interested in what you have to say, but we cannot respond without background information on your issue. Please come forward to and address the committee if you would like to come forward at open forum. All right, there's no one here, so I will close open forum and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.